it's Cupcake Kami-sama back here, and welcome to another video. Today, which is May 26th, 2021, in case you're watching this in the distant future, or in advance if you're a patron, is exactly 10 years since I bought my first Lolita dress. I've talked about how I discovered Lolita fashion and a little bit of how I stumbled upon said dress, so I'll link that in the cards up there. And to celebrate this anniversary, an entire decade of being into the fashion one way or another, as well as owning the dress for 10 years, I thought that I'll do a little bit of co-ord with me, I guess, but more focused on talking you through my thought processes when I coordinate, what sort of things I consider, rather than going through what do you think of this, what do you think of that. It's not a live stream, so it's not like you can help me. You're always welcome to drop suggestions in the comments on what you would have done. However, this is a coordinate and an idea that I have in my mind fairly set, and since the next Around Your Wardrobe in 30 Coordinates prompt will be the item you've had the longest that you still own, which just happens to be my very first dress, I thought this seems fitting so that you get a glimpse of how I arrive at the final coordinate, and then in a week's time you'll get to see the lookbook of that. Before we get cracking on with putting the coordinate together, make sure to subscribe to my channel if you're interested in Lolita fashion content. My aim is to do at least one video a month, but recently I've been lucky enough to be able to do more than that, although I can't necessarily guarantee when that other video a month will come out. So you'll want to subscribe if you want more of that, and you'll want to click the bell button next to it so that you're notified when it happens instead of having to manually check yourself. And if you want those videos 1 week before they go public, I suggest you join my Patreon. A link to that is in the description box below. If you want the early access to videos, you'll want the $2 a month tier. But if this is a bit much for you, but you still would like to support me regularly, there is a $1 a month tier, which will get you early access to every single blog post that I do. Which this one might not be a blog post as such, but there will be something for the 10th anniversary of me being into the fashion on my blog, and there are always Around Your Wardrobe in 30 Coordinates challenge blog posts as well as the lookbooks. With all that being said, let's get to coordinating. Here she is, my very first Lolita dress. It's a JSK from Bodyline. As is usual with Bodyline, their designs tend to have product numbers rather than names, although I've seemed to have noticed that they've changed that recently. But when I bought this in 2011, Bodyline were more about that product name than they were about naming their designs. So this was the L262, as far as I remember. I think Law Library lists this as something like wrap, ribbon, halter neck, dress, JSK, whatever. Because this used to be a halter neck dress, which I had converted since to regular straps, and there's a plethora of giant ribbons going along the hem. It's a simple piece, it's very comfortable. It's surprisingly more versatile than one might think, given how I got it to be more for rockabilly vintage fashions type thing. It's not the poofiest of dresses, which if you have it or if you manage to get it on the second-hand market, because I don't think it's available via Bodyline anymore, you might find that a bit restrictive in coordinating. But generally speaking, as long as you have things in complementary colours and cuts, this is a great dress to have. I appreciate that when it's hanging up there, you're mostly seeing it at the bottom and not so much at the top, but this is the best setup, trust me, I've tried what works. When thinking about the Around Your Wardrobe in 30 Coordinates challenge, obviously the first thing that I consider is the prompt. Sometimes the prompt specifies either the thing that you need to use, like in this case, or it specifies restrictions in terms of styling that you should aim to stick within. The latter tend to be easier when you're trying to come up with an idea, because sometimes it's easier to match a main piece to a specific theme or to a specific prompt and work your way that way. Whereas if you're given a choice of a main piece, particularly if your wardrobe like mine has grown in the 10 years since this was new to me, it can be overwhelming to think of what can I do, because there's too many options. And given that this is a dress that I've worn a lot over the years, I tried to come up with something different. If not in theme, then in the overall look and the pieces that I use with it. It's simply what keeps my own interest in the fashion going and gets my creative juices flowing. Given both the prompt and the occasion, I thought it would be fitting to style this dress in a retro Lolita coordinate and going as rockabilly as I can whilst still keeping the overall look Lolita, blending the two together in as balanced a way as I can. Because whilst obviously this lends itself perfectly to vintage and rockabilly type styling, other than the early years where it was literally just the dress, petticoat and kind of nothing else, I've not done anything too dead set on that. I've had things that were obviously inspired and coordinates that were trying to be more Lolita, and I'd like to create something fun and playful and something that, well, my 2011 self probably wouldn't have even thought of, but I think she'd enjoy it once it was on. Once I had decided on this as my theme and styling, the next question was color scheme. Do I go my typical tricolor route? Do I stick with white, seeing as all the lace accents in here are white? Do I try something completely different color-wise? All of these are perfectly doable. All of these are something that I would wear, but sometimes going out of your way and outside the box just for the sake of going outside the box is making your life unnecessarily difficult. There's nothing wrong with going for the obvious or going for what you're guaranteed will work. So this is what I decided on, what I settled on. I decided to go with whites. Knowing me, not all of them will be perfectly color matched and not all of them will be perfectly whites, because I'm firmly of the opinion that as long as the overall look flows together and looks alright, I'm not that bothered if things are slightly different, if one is pure white and one is off-white and one probably leans more ivory, as long as they all create a look rather than create a jarring effect. So having then decided on that, then came the question of what pieces would I need to use to achieve that look. As with any retro Lolita coordinate that I do, I know not everyone who does retro Lolita will do it that way, but for myself, retro Lolita is a lot about styling, as in hair and makeup. Once you have the right hair and makeup, even the more traditionally Lolita pieces and cuts of things can end up working in your favor, because at a glance you have the right elements. You know, if we had a typical Lolita coordinate with this, with white blouse, I say Lolita, I mean Sweet Lolita specifically. If we had a typical Sweet Lolita coordinate with this dress, with a white blouse, with some red tea party shoes, everything as far as clothing and accessories was concerned was Lolita, but styled with vintage curls and vintage makeup. You know, the black winged eyeliner and red lipstick. From afar, it would still read, ooh, that's quite rockabilly. More importantly, if you were out on the street, someone who doesn't know about Lolita fashion might look at you and go, oh, that person's going for rockabilly, or that person's going for a 50s thing. Categorized, labeled, I no longer need to ask questions, I can just move on. But for this, I want to go specifically with clothing items that also evoke that rockabilly vibe. And whilst I do tend to use vintage and rockabilly somewhat interchangeably, in this case, I do want the coordinate to end up a bit more rockabilly, not necessarily edgy, but something that a good girl who thinks she's going bad might wear and have fun out with her gal pals. Because she's still just that little bit too cutesy to fully be a bad girl, which is oddly specific, but sometimes that's exactly the kind of narrative and backstory that you need to figure out which pieces will be the right ones. And in this case, once I finally honed in on that backstory narrative to the coordinate, I knew exactly what needed to go next with this jacket. This is just a regular white pleather jacket that I got from a fast fashion shop, having been on the lookout specifically for a leather jacket that would work with Lolita but not restricted to it. I do tend to wear it just regularly whether I'm in Lolita or not. During that awkward season, usually spring and autumn, when it's a bit too nippy out to just go out in your cardigan, but it's not quite cold enough that you need something for actual warmth. You just need something to protect you from wind mostly, and a little bit from the drizzle that might happen. Let's see in editing if camera picks up on that. But if you were here in person, you'd notice that the lace on a dress is distinctly white, whereas this is an off-white. But this is what I mean about not always being too pedantic about getting exact colour matches. For one, when worn together, given that this isn't a terribly huge amount of lace, they'll end up working together, particularly as there will be other off-whitish elements in the coordinate. For another, and again, editing Paulina might prove me wrong, things sometimes look differently on camera than they do in real life. So if you're putting a coordinate specifically for being on camera, whether that's for pictures or for filming, don't be too nitpicky about getting every single shade exactly right, because ultimately it might not matter. It might seem like an unusual approach to start with a jacket rather than with a blouse, as most Lolita would, but the reason for this is this particular coordinate will have the jacket on constantly. It's only going to be put together for the lookbook and for the flat lay photos on the blog, so I don't need to concern myself too terribly with a blouse. If I were to wear this, I probably would consider what blouse I'd wear underneath, so that if I do get a bit too warm or I'm no longer outside and I take this off, I still have an outfit that looks complete, as well as potentially for practical reasons, because if it was hot enough that I'd wear this dress without a blouse altogether, I wouldn't be wearing this. But for this particular coordinate, it doesn't matter if I have a blouse underneath, because it's only there to be on camera. If it turns out to be a chilly filming day, I probably will put something underneath there. Something maybe like this. This is just a cotton crop top from fast fashion that I do actually wear quite a lot with Lolita, both in ways that have it visible and not. It's nice, comfortable, light layer to have underneath if I need just a tiny bit of extra comfort or an extra layer to keep me warmer. But for now, I'll just put the jacket on over the dress without bothering with a blouse. It'll be easier for me as well. The jacket is on. I've done it up in the same way as I plan on having it for the coordinates, so just zipping it up kind of halfway. It should end up roughly just below the bust or just at the bust, whilst the hem of the jacket should sit right at my waistline, so with the petticoat on, it should have a nice fit and flare sort of effect. And immediately, just by having this leather jacket contrasting with the cutesiness that is all the lace and the bows and the ruffling on the JSK, you can see the good girl thinks that she's going bad, but she's still too cutesy to be actually bad and break the rules vibe going. But obviously, just a jacket and a dress does not a coordinate make. And next in the process for me would typically be legs, because I love Lolita legwear. It's one of my favorite parts about Lolita, but as much as I love legwear, I'd most likely start with the shoes. So considering how I'm going for a red and white, roughly, color scheme, the easiest way to balance colors is to alternate them. So if we're having white, red, the next logical move would be to go white, red again for the legs, which leaves me with two choices for shoes. One that is more Lolita, the bodyline heels, that I do wear a lot with this dress, but whilst they're certainly Lolita and they're certainly great enough to work with rockabilly kinds of styling, and I've also done that in the past, I kind of want to push it a little bit and go for a pair of more strictly rockabilly heels, specifically these ones. For rockabilly vintage fashions, they're perfectly acceptable. They have the right shape with a T-bar strap. They are the right height, not too high, particularly with the platform. They're very elegant but fun. They're not trying to go for anything too sexy, and they're softening things up with things like, with the detail like that bow. For Lolita, and I'm pretty sure I've seen these on places like eBay with Lolita shoved in amongst all the different keywords that they could into the listing. For Lolita, they are a bit too mature and not quite cutesy enough. However, because this particular coordinate is balancing the rockabilly with Lolita and trying to balance the cutesy, frilly, sweet elements with more mature, feminine playfulness, I do think that these would go perfectly. They match the vibe that we already have thanks to the jacket pretty well. And because even sweet coordinates feel somewhat less sweet and cutesy when they're in true tones like red and blue rather than pink and sax and other pastels, we can make these work. But in order to do that, we'll need to balance the rockabilly element of the shoes with the right legwear. Seeing as I don't have anywhere to put these on, I'm going to just put them on the ground. When I think of rockabilly, my thoughts go to cherries as a motif pretty quickly, not necessarily instantaneously, because polka dots beat that a little bit, but cherries are up there in top 3 or at least top 5 most common motifs in rockabilly fashion. So with that in mind, my instinct naturally went first to put in this with cherry socks. Specifically these ones. These are drained cherry from Angelic Pretty, like so. And I have worn these socks with this dress before. They have the polka dot pattern, which is a nice filler bonus that mimics the polka dot pattern on the dress. But more crucially, they have the cherries, which I could incorporate later through accessories, as well as they have bows, so again, mimicking what's already on the dress. The extra fun detail is that they have I'm not sure what the specific word for that technique is, but they have a perforated pattern on the back of hearts. So the back of your legs isn't just plain white with red polka dots. You do get a bit of extra detailing and having depth throughout your coordinate. And as great as these are as an option, my brain just couldn't stop there, and I have asked myself, is this the best I can do? Is this the most Lolita meets rockabilly thing I can do? It's certainly a good option, but it felt like a slightly too easy option. I still knew that I needed something to be white and red, which thankfully narrowed down my potential choices. And of those choices, these ankle socks, also from Angelic Pretty, were the best option. Whilst theme-wise, we have no cherries, we have some bows. There's also a few on the back. But as far as the socks go, they would work really nicely. Moreover, if I can pick the shoe up and try and make that work, they'd work really nicely with the shoe itself. The open T-bar design would let you see the heart design on the foot itself. The frill at the ankle would sit just above that, and this frill would soften otherwise harsh lines of the shoe itself, thus stopping it from being so mature and adding a bit of whimsy and changing the playfulness from rockabilly kind of feminine to Lolita kind of feminine. It's more girly rather than womanly, which is what we want in Lolita. And to an extent, it's also a vibe that rockabilly doesn't shy away from. It is something that, like most fashions, celebrates the youthful and being young, completely ignoring that you can have fun with clothing, whatever your age. This seemed like a far more interesting option to me than the drained cherry socks. However, here we come to a dilemma that may be somewhat particular to me, in that whilst I know that I've done it several times, including at least once with this dress, I'm not personally necessarily keen on having long sleeves with ankle socks, or the opposite, having over the knee socks or even tights with short sleeves. This isn't part of Lolita rules, it never was, it never will be, just something that ticks me off in the wrong way and something that I tend to want to avoid. I wouldn't say hate, because as I said, I know I've done it, but it's something that even on my own coordinates, when I look back at them, I think, well then, was it cold or was it warm? I know I shouldn't be asking that question. I live in the UK. It's frequently completely ambivalent whether it's warm or cold, but it just does something for me. However, I don't necessarily want to swap the cute effect that this gives me for the sake of balancing lengths, essentially. And again, when thinking about how to solve this conundrum, I went back to what my core concept for the coordinate was, which is rockabilly meets Lolita. And that led to a solution that I'm going to go for, and sadly lack an additional arm to hold too many things at once, but white fishnets. Layering white fishnets underneath the socks will stop the leg from being bare skin and then socks, in contrast to the long sleeves of the jacket. You won't necessarily see the fishnets themselves unless you get quite up close, which I know that for the lookbook I will, but generally speaking, it's not going to be instantly noticeable at a glance. However, they will add a bit of texture, and by being fishnets, they'll also add that tiny bit of an edge that fits rockabilly. And in essence, it almost ends up, let's see if we can do this right. Not only we're maintaining color balance by having white, red, even though the socks and the fishnets are more pure white that matches the lace better, the leather trim on the shoes matches the jacket a little bit better, but also fishnets are not opaque. My skin will be underneath there like it is now, and that will alter the colour of the fishnet somewhat to be slightly less stark. But we're also almost ended up with sandwiching Lolita and rockabilly in terms of which style individual pieces fit better / are from. The jacket is rockabilly, the JSK is Lolita. The fishnets are rockabilly, the ankle socks are Lolita, the shoes are rockabilly. This is coincidental and something that I've literally only thought of now as I was talking you through this. But when you are able to realize things like this, it's good to notice them and see whether that changes your coordinate and what you think of it in any way, shape or form. Because if we were to stick to, what's the word now? Well, it's not quite what I was going for, but it's the next best word that will do. A more tick list approach of ensuring that a coordinate is balanced, then not only we'd know that headpiece or something on the head needs to be red, but that it needs to be Lolita, so that this sandwiching, alternating balance is maintained. Now let me open real quick my wardrobe spreadsheet, because it's easier to flick through that than do a lot of bending up and down to see what I own. That's the point of the spreadsheet. My instinct goes first to an angelic pretty head bow. This one specifically, it's the Twinkle Sky one. It's missing the detachable chain, but that doesn't bother me. And it would work really well. If you're very pedantic about color matches, then this is more of a winey tree red and this is more of an orange tone red when put next to each other. But that's going to be up here where you can't even see it, it's off camera right now. But it's going to be at the top of my head, separated by a big layer of white through this jacket and then through my neck and face and hair. So it doesn't matter whether it matches or not, because it forms a cohesive look. And it's also a great option because it's quite a stand-uppy kind of bow without being too head-eating. The hairstyling that I had in mind for this particular coordinate wouldn't necessarily suffer if I had a big head-eating bow, because the volume created by the hair would be enough to balance it out. But it's nice that it's a smaller one because it allows me a little bit more space and maneuvering room to add smaller pieces, like maybe some white clips around this one. This is quite honestly the sort of thing that I tend to decide on the day. I would lay myself out a couple of options that I think might work with this, try them on and see if any of them stick. So I'm not going to do that right now. I'll just put this through here so that we know that this is an option. But part of me can't stop thinking of a more typically rockabilly headpiece that could work with Lolita if I could get the shape right, which is a scarf tied into a bow. If I'm in a slightly different place camera wise, then I'm sorry, my camera moved as I was getting the scarf out. This is the scarf I had in mind. It's just some thin synthetic fabric. There it is. It's fairly see-through, but also wide enough to be folded over. I'm pretty sure that I've used this for my headpiece in the inspired by a historical era around your wardrobe in 30 coordinates challenge, so I'll link it either up there or in the description box below. But I know that in the past, whilst wearing vintage inspired outfit, I've worn it around my head and tied it into a fluffy bow off center to the side. Now the purists out there would say, but then we have another bit of white at the top and we need some balance. Yeah, it's not wrong, but also it's one of those things that I won't really know how I feel about it until I try it on the day with the hair, with the makeup and with everything else already on. It also means that I'm keeping a bit of mystery for you, so you'll have to check out the next video to see which one I end up with. So for now, this is an option that might happen. My instinct tells me that I'm more likely to end up with the head bow than the scarf, but I might still end up incorporating the scarf somewhere. I don't know myself. I'll find out once I get around to filming this, and you'll find out once the video goes live. And that's the base. That's the base coordinate with the processes and the thinking behind it. As I mentioned, I am in a habit of picking my accessories and the smaller bits on the day once I have everything on, and can just put them next to me and see, does this work, does that work, do I need this, do I need that, which one's better. Even though I've opted to not go for the cherry socks, I do think that I'll probably go for cherries as another complementary motif with this coordinate. It's a very common one in rockabilly fashions, and it's something that I simply have quite a bit of, so it would be easy to add things. So I'm not going to get them now because they're too far away and I can't be bothered to go all the way there. But I do have cherry earrings that I'd very likely wear. Then I also have this cherry necklace, which is pretty much a staple for any rockabilly wardrobe, and with that open neckline it will be displayed nicely. I also have this cherry and whipped cream ring, which would be perfect. So this earrings, 3 cherry pieces already there. Brooches. Now for someone who's not phased when putting pins and brooches through my dresses, regardless of whether they're Bodyline or another brand, I'm hesitant to put anything through this leather jacket. Fabrics like polycotton, which this is, have a bit more movement and a slightly looser, more elastic weave, so if I put a hole through this, once I take the brooch out, the fabric can sometimes end up going back to where it was before. Whereas with pleather and leather, that doesn't particularly happen. Let me whip out my wardrobe spreadsheet so that I can see everything clearly. What do I have in terms of brooches? Let's see if I have any bow clips. Because an alligator clip could be pinned to the lapels without causing any additional damage. Here's a thought. So I guess that's a nope on brooch's front. As I said, it might change on the day depending on how I feel about how this looks altogether. But for now, this is the coordinate I'm sticking with. There's one other accessory that I think I'll be using, but I'll keep that one a mystery as well. So that wraps it up. This will be the next Around Your Wardrobe in 30 Coordinates challenge lookbook for the item you've had the longest that you still own, or if I've messed that title up, I'll correct myself via a caption. And considering that this was all put together to celebrate the 10th anniversary of me owning this dress, that was a bit too vigorous, wasn't it? To celebrate 10 years of me owning this dress, 10 years of my being into Lolita fashion, even if at the time this was bought, it was for different reasons, and let's face it, I was eater as heck if I tried to enter any Lolita spaces. But that doesn't matter, I'm here now, I know better. I've learned, and I can show that through putting together a coordinate with this dress to show that I still really actually love it. It's still such a great staple in my wardrobe that I can't get enough of and don't envision myself parting with anytime soon. Yeah, I'm really excited for this cord. I think it's going to be so much fun to film. I'll have to play some music by the Baseballs to get me in the right mood, which if you like 1950s style rock and roll, I recommend listening to the Baseballs. They do some great covers of contemporary songs in that 50s rock and roll style. Great stuff. If you're watching this video on the first day that it's out, so May 26th, then you'll see the complete look that I've landed on plus styling next week. If you're watching this after that, in whatever future, then I'll link that lookbook video up there in a corner. And all that's left to say is thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that you might have picked up something useful from me rambling on about how I plan coordinates, because whilst I did ramble and talked a lot, it's because I was breaking down a process that mostly happens subconsciously and instinctively into a step-by-step. This isn't actually the conversation that I had with myself. This is breaking down a couple of flashes of inspiration into we went from here to there to that to land on this, so that it makes sense and so that we can distill whatever tips, advice and opinions from it. If you've enjoyed that, then please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, comment on it, subscribe to the channel. As mentioned in the beginning, my aim is to make at least one video a month. Often these days I manage to do more than that, so if you don't want to miss any of them, subscribing and clicking the bell is the way to go. You can support me additionally by either Patreon or Ko-fi, and if you would like to find more Lolita content, then I highly encourage you to check out my blog, which is Cupcakes and Unicorns. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye!